Thank you to everyone who's been waiting patiently for this video. I've been a little bit busy, but I'm here today to tell you all how to prepare for your interviews, your technical software engineering interviews, not so much program management interviews. Sometimes they do ask you to code, but there are some other things that they also ask you to get into. So I'll focus on software engineering interviews here. The first thing that you do, you're gonna go into this room, maybe you have a panel, maybe you just have one interviewer, right? But this interviewer is going to start asking you some questions. They'll probably ask you a few behavioral questions, but I'll get into those questions in another video. I want to keep these short, so y'all stay focused, right? Now, the first thing you should do, if I'm your interviewer and I come to you and I say, I don't know, give me the first character in a string that doesn't repeat, right? The first thing you should do is not go up to the board and start writing questions. The first thing you should do is ask clarifying questions. Ask me what I mean when I say doesn't repeat. Do I mean contiguously? Do I mean anywhere in the string? Do I actually mean the first unique character? What do I mean by first? First as in position in the string, from front to back, from back to front. Just ask the clarifying questions you need to ask to actually be able to solve the question correctly. Because the worst thing you could do is go up, solve the question, thinking you're the realist, and find out that you solved the wrong question and that you have no time to fix it, right? That's the first thing you should do. And something that helps a lot with that is asking for examples, right? In the example I just gave, first non-repeating character, right? Non-duplicate character. What you want to do is, or did I say first duplicate? Either way, both of these are questions, that might get asked sometimes. But what you want to do is say, okay, can you give me an example of a word? So if I give you, I don't know, the word deer, right? And D-E-E-R, the animal, right? I'll go up and I'll say, okay, well, what's the first duplicate character in this case, right? You start with the letter D. You see that, okay, D doesn't repeat. You go to the next letter, you see E. E doesn't repeat, right? Or hasn't repeated yet. And then you go to the next letter, the E, and you see, oh, okay, I've seen an E before, right? And asking for examples sometimes help you figure out your algorithm, even if you feel like when you get asked a question, you just don't know how to approach it. An example will show you the pattern. Because when you're solving these problems, it's like your brain skips a lot of steps. Your brain does these things. Like if I wrote a word down and I told you to find that letter, your brain goes through these steps. It's just a matter of breaking it down and figuring out how to make the computer do it. So that's the first thing. And after you've gotten the example, you've asked your clarifying questions, kind of like in your essay sometimes, try to restate the question. Restate it just to make sure you understand it. And then your interviewer can say, yes, that's what I meant. Or your interviewer can say, no, that's not what I meant. Here's what I actually mean, to make sure, again, that you're solving the right question, right? Now, the next thing after you do, at least what I like to do is I like to mention my solution to the interviewer. So once I know that I got the question down, I understand what I'm supposed to be solving, I'll ask them, okay, here's what I understand. I'm supposed to be doing A, B, and C. Is that correct? They'll say yes. Okay, here's how I'm thinking about approaching it. I'm thinking of using, I don't know, a map, right? Hash or tree, whatever, depending on what I need for this case, if we're talking Java, right? I'm thinking about using a map to do blah, blah, and blah. Does that sound reasonable? And then your interviewer can tell you, yes, that sounds reasonable. Go ahead and code it, right? Or maybe he or she will say, no, actually, that's not the best approach because of blah and blah. Did you take these things into consideration? And even if they do say that's not the best approach, that's better for you because why? This is the beginning. This is earlier on. This is before you started coding, right? It's better to know now that there was a flaw in your solution than to find out later after you've been at the board coding for like 15 minutes, right? So make sure that you restate, the question, and then you also mention your solution and get feedback on it before you jump into it. Because that's something that you're going to be doing on the job, right? If you go and you implement something, and then you come to your team and you're like, hey, here's what I did, and they're like, oh, all of this is wrong, and you have to do it over again. Trust me, it's not pretty. So two things, or that's all part of one right there, right? And then after that, you have, I guess, you can consider that two things. After that, basically, it's time to go up to the board and start coding. So a lot of people like to rush into it. Take your time, go up there slowly, think about the problem, ask about assumptions that you can make, right? There are times where in this, like the problem I just gave, if I said first duplicate character, right? You can actually say, can I assume it's just letters, right? Because there are a lot of characters, right? But if you can narrow down the set of characters, that makes your life easier. You can say, can I assume it's just letters? Okay, can I assume it's just the lowercase letters? Worst case scenario, I'll say no, right? But in a lot of situations, I'll say yes because that has nothing really to do with what I want to test. Like you can use this smaller set to still show me that you can do what I need you to do with regards to this problem. So make sure you do that and then go up there, start coding, and please, as you're coding, make sure that you're speaking out loud. The worst thing you can do is just go up to the board and just start coding and not say anything. Even if you get the problem right? Like even if you get the answer correct, it still is a problem because the interviewer doesn't know how you think. And at these interviews, it's like we're trying to figure out how you think, not just if you can figure out the answer to the problem. Because maybe you figured out the answer to the problem by yourself, or maybe you just saw the problem on the internet the day before or something like that, right? So if you're actually there and you're writing the code and you're explaining to me, hey, this is what I'm doing here, this is what I'm doing here, then I really see, okay, this person's thinking this through. He or she knows what they're doing, right? So you have to make sure you're doing that. And also if you get stuck and you're up at the board and you're not saying a word, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if you're just quiet because you're thinking and you know what to do, or because you have no idea what to do and you need a hint, right? And remember that the interviewers aren't monsters, right? It's like we're there to actually help you as well. So if you get stuck, maybe you have the whole solution, there's just one part that you can't connect, right? And if you're telling me what you're thinking, I can probably give you a little hint that'll nudge you in that right direction so that you can get to a solution, right? But if you don't say anything, I can't do that. And then I might just throw out a hint, and then it's like, oh, well, I didn't know where you were at, so I threw out a hint, and then you came upon the solution, but I don't know if it's because of what I said, or if it was you had majority of the solution and it was just a tiny little nudge that you needed. That could affect the results, the outcome of your actual interview, right? So the next thing is after you write your code, right, and hopefully you'll be discussing it with your engineer during the actual time you're coding it, so that you'll be pretty confident, that you'll know if things are going well, you'll know if the problem is going well while you're solving it. But at the very end, before you say you're done, right, test your solution. It's so important. There are times where maybe you write the code and you're thinking, oh, yo, this is good, this code is fire, right? And then you go through a simple example and you're like, oh man, I didn't account for this edge case, right? And edge cases are huge, right? There are a lot of problems they'll give you. They're tricky problems. They're pretty straightforward for most cases, but the edge case, like if you're dealing with arrays, it's the last character and the first character, and maybe the second character as well, right? And we're talking C++, index 0, index 1, right? And then n-1, right? Those ones might throw off your algorithm and you have to account for them individually. It happens a lot in recursion as well, when you're dealing with like the base case and things like that. So make sure that you test your solution with some examples, different examples too. You got to think about like the different classes of input. That's a different discussion I can probably get into in another video, right? More in detail video. But make sure you test your solution and then tell your interviewer I'm done. Right. And then your interviewer will probably have you go through examples again too. And you can say, all right, well, here's an example. Here's what would happen. I'm going to start at the first character in the example I gave, right? So start at the first character and then move to the next character, then move to the next character and show them that it's working and show them how you would actually solve the problem. Right. And that's pretty much what you need to do. You might have a couple problems that they ask you during the interview, but for the most part, that's how you should approach each of those problems. And in another video, I'll go into some of the other things. Like, for example, sometimes your interviewer will say, sometimes you go up there and you're ready. You're like, all right, Hafiz told me to talk in this, this interview, right? So I'm up there, I'm at the board, I'm writing code, and I start trying to talk to my interviewer, and my interviewer says, oh, you know what, just solve the problem, and then we'll discuss it after. You're like, snap, what do? I have to skip the rest of the steps. It's fine. Just go through the rest of the steps. Still, make sure you're thinking. Make sure that if there is something that you need to say to the interviewer or get clarity on, make sure that you do that. Make sure you go through an example, test your solution, right, before you say you're done. And then say, okay, I'm done. I've had interviews like that where the interviewer just didn't want, maybe the interviewer was there on his laptop or her laptop. They shouldn't be, but sometimes, they'd be really busy, right? So maybe they're there doing that, and I'll still just go solve the problem, and then I'll let them know, right? At the end of the day, you just need to make sure you follow these steps and practice these, before you go to the interview, so it comes naturally to you. And remember that the interview is a discussion amongst engineers, right? The technical interview, right? it's, don't think of it as they're here, they're grilling you, they're asking me all these questions. Oh man, I'm nervous, right? Like you're not in court. You know what I'm saying? Like you're not over here getting grilled by an attorney. It's like, no, you can ask questions back. You can say thanks to the interviewer. Make sure you do that, because if I'm interviewing you and you're here and you're talking to me and we're having a good conversation, that makes me want to hire you more. Because one, it's like, okay, not only do you know what you're doing, right? Because that part's important too, the skill's important. But it's like, okay, not only do you know what you're doing, but you can actually communicate with me about your solution. And that's what we're going to be doing on the job, right? It's not just going to be one person asking another person questions. It's like, no, we're going to be asking each other questions, discussing a solution. So at the interview, I'm trying to see that I can actually work with you in addition to seeing that you can solve the problem. So as usual, if you have any other topics you want me to cover, if you have any questions about what I've mentioned in this video, feel free to reach out to me, post a comment, whatever you need, holla at me.